A cozy bedtime story for peaceful sleep. Once upon a quiet time, far away on a rocky cliff by the sea, stood an old lighthouse. It had a round stone base, a white tower that reached into the fog, and a soft golden light that had not shone in many years. The lighthouse had once guided ships safely through midnight storms. But the sea routes changed, the boats grew fewer, and the lighthouse was no longer needed. So it waited, patiently, silently, watching the tides rise and fall, listening to the wind sing lullabies through the cracks in its windows. No one lived there now, not for a long, long time. But one evening, as rain swept in and the sky turned the color of sleep, a little boy named Eli arrived. He had a suitcase full of books, a scarf knitted by his grandmother, and a heart that felt a little too full of thoughts for someone so small. His parents had sent him to stay with his uncle for the summer, but the uncle lived in the old lighthouse. Eli wasn't sure how he felt about it. It looked lonely, quiet, a little too still. But when he stepped inside, something happened. The wood floor creaked softly, almost like it sighed with relief. The air smelled of salt and stories. Upstairs, a spiral staircase wrapped around the walls, climbing like a sleeping snake. And at the top, tucked beneath the glass dome where the light once lived, was a small round room with a bed just big enough for Eli, a reading chair, and a little window that watched the ocean. That night, the storm came. The waves crashed. The thunder rolled. Eli curled up beneath the heavy blanket, clutching one of his books. He tried to read, but the wind whispered too many things, words he didn't understand, or maybe did, somewhere deep inside. He whispered back, "I'm not scared," he said softly. "I'm just waiting." And that was when the lighthouse answered, not in words, not in sound. The golden light, which hadn't worked in years, flickered once, then again. Then it glowed, warm and steady, sweeping out across the stormy sea, a long beam of comfort in the night. And somewhere far, far away, a small fishing boat, lost in the fog, saw the light. A father and daughter steering the wheel looked up and smiled. They weren't lost anymore. Eli saw it too, his eyes wide, his heart full. He didn't understand how it worked, but he didn't need to. Some things shine only when someone is there to witness them. And from that night on, the lighthouse was never lonely again. Each evening, Eli would climb the spiral stairs, sit by the window, and wait for the light to glow. Sometimes it didn't. Sometimes it did. But it didn't matter. He was there, and the lighthouse knew. And so did the sea. Eli woke to the sound of waves brushing the rocks like whispers from the deep. The golden light above had faded with the dawn, but its warmth still lingered in the round room at the top of the tower. He sat up slowly, rubbed his sleepy eyes, and listened. The lighthouse creaked like it was stretching after a long night, and the wind outside had softened like it too had found rest. That morning, Eli helped his uncle with small chores, sweeping sand from the entryway, dusting off old books stacked near the fireplace, and feeding the seagulls that waited on the windowsill like curious neighbors. His uncle didn't talk much, but he smiled with his eyes, and Eli liked that. In the afternoon, when the clouds returned and the ocean turned gray again, Eli climbed back up to the top of the tower, carrying a notebook and a pencil stub. He sat by the little round window and began to write. Not a story exactly, but more like a message to the sea. "Dear ocean," he scribbled slowly, "do you know the lighthouse is still here? It's old, but it's kind. It helped someone last night. I think it's magic, but quiet magic. The kind you only notice if you're paying attention. The rain began again, soft and steady. The wind picked up just enough to make the tower hum like a lullaby. As the sky darkened once more, Eli felt something shift in the air, a tiny thrum in the walls, a hush in his chest. He looked up. The lantern room above him flickered once more, then glowed, soft, golden, and true. He didn't ask why. He simply smiled, placed his notebook on the wooden ledge, and whispered, "I see you." And once again, far across the water, someone else saw it too. The third night at the lighthouse arrived wrapped in a thick fog, the kind that muffled sound and made the world feel like it was sleeping beneath a heavy blanket. Eli stood at the top of the spiral staircase, watching the fog swirl outside the little round window like drifting ghosts, soft and silent. He didn't mind the quiet anymore. In fact, he liked it. There was something comforting about the stillness, something that felt like listening instead of speaking. That day had been slow and peaceful. He and his uncle had walked the rocky path behind the lighthouse, collecting bits of sea glass and smooth stones washed up by the tide. His uncle had told him that every piece of glass once had a life, once belonged to something broken before the sea polished it into something beautiful. Eli had liked that idea, a world where even broken things were made gentle again by time and water. Now, as the sky darkened once more and the first soft raindrops kissed the windows, Eli sat beneath the great lantern and opened his notebook. He didn't plan what to write. He just let the pencil move. "Some nights," he wrote, "feel like they remember things we don't. Like the wind knows stories older than we are. Maybe that's why the lighthouse still waits. Maybe it's remembering too." As he finished the line, a sudden flicker lit the glass dome above him. The golden light blinked once, then held steady. It felt warmer tonight, softer, and then something happened. A soft knock echoed from the base of the tower, not a hard bang, but a gentle tap, like fingers asking permission to be let in. Eli froze, his heart thumping softly like a second clock. He glanced down the spiral staircase, half expecting to see his uncle, but no one was there. Another knock, then silence. Slowly, carefully, Eli stood and crept down the steps, each one creaking beneath his bare feet. The lighthouse was quiet again, the only sound the rain and the wind outside. When he reached the bottom floor, he paused in front of the thick wooden door. Another knock, this time softer, almost hesitant. He turned the iron handle and opened it slowly. No one was there, only the fog. But just at the edge of the stone path, where the wild grass bent with the wind, stood a small figure, a girl, maybe his age, wearing a red coat that looked faded by sea salt and time. She didn't speak, just looked at him with wide, wondering eyes, as if she'd seen the lighthouse light from far away and followed it here. And Eli, without thinking, stepped aside and whispered, "You can come in." The girl nodded and crossed the threshold, leaving wet footprints on the floor behind her. She didn't say her name. She didn't need to. The lighthouse had called her, just like it called him. And maybe, just maybe, there were more stories waiting in the fog. Tonight, as the rain whispered on the windows and the fog clung tightly to the cliffs, Eli awoke with a strange feeling, like a secret was trying to speak just beyond the edge of sleep. He blinked into the dim glow of the lantern room, where the golden light still pulsed like a heartbeat through the mist, and turned his head slowly toward the other bed in the round tower room. The girl in the red coat lay curled beneath the thick blanket, her breath soft and even, her hair spread across the pillow like seaweed on wet sand. She hadn't spoken much since arriving the night before, only nodded when he offered her bread or tea or the warmest blanket he could find. But somehow, Eli felt he knew her already, like she had been part of the lighthouse long before she'd ever stepped inside it. When morning came, the girl rose without a word and followed Eli down the spiral stairs. They walked the rocky path in silence, the waves crashing below like distant drums. At the edge of the cliff, she stopped and pointed toward the sea. There, barely visible through the thick veil of mist, was a tiny boat, empty, bobbing gently on the tide as if it had been searching for something and simply drifted here. Eli looked at her, confused, but she just whispered one word, "Mine." Her voice was soft, like wind through tall grass. They climbed down the rocks together, carefully, until they reached the boat, nestled between black stones and foam. It wasn't much more than a dinghy, weathered by storms and silence. Inside lay an old compass and a single page from a journal, half-soaked, but still legible. Eli held it up and read aloud. "The lighthouse is real. If you follow the light, it will bring you home." He looked at the girl, who only stared at the paper like it had been written just for her. And perhaps it had. Back at the tower, the girl began to speak more, just in whispers at first. She told Eli she had lost her way during a storm months ago while sailing with her father. She had been waiting ever since on an island that wasn't quite there, in dreams that weren't quite awake, until she saw the light one night, cutting through sleep like a warm knife through butter. That was when she followed it, walking through fog, rain, memory, and time itself. The lighthouse had called her home. Eli didn't question any of it. He simply nodded and sat beside her, sharing his biscuits and stories, letting the quiet grow between them like a soft plant curling toward the light. That evening, as darkness fell again, both children sat beneath the golden beam of the lantern, watching it sweep across the sea. No words were needed now. The fog was listening. The sea was waiting. And the lighthouse, so old and so patient, was no longer alone. Tonight, the rain was steady, like a lullaby played on 1,000 rooftops, and the lighthouse stood proud as ever, casting its gentle golden eye across the deep gray sea. Inside, wrapped in warm blankets, Eli and the girl sat side by side in the lantern room, a steaming mug of cocoa in each of their hands. They didn't speak much. There was a quiet between them that didn't need words. It was the kind of silence that comes when two souls understand each other, like waves understanding the shore. The girl, whose name Eli had learned was Mira, traced shapes in the fogged glass with her finger, circles, stars, little boats, each one fading moments after she drew them. "What do you think the lighthouse sees when it looks out there?" she asked softly, her voice nearly lost in the hum of wind. Eli didn't answer right away. He watched the beam of light sweep across the sea, slowly, steadily, like it was counting heartbeats in the dark. "Maybe," he said at last, "it sees stories. Ones no one's told yet." Mira smiled at that, and for the first time it reached her eyes. She had the kind of smile that felt like sunlight peeking through thick clouds. Rare, but warm enough to remember forever. Later that day, the fog began to lift just a little, and they ventured outside, stepping carefully along the cliff's edge. There, hidden in the tall grasses behind the lighthouse, they found a rusted gate half swallowed by ivy. Neither of them had noticed it before, even though they'd walked past it many times. With effort, they pushed it open, and beyond it lay a path, a narrow, winding trail of flat stones leading into the thickest part of the coastal forest. The trees bent close overhead, whispering in a language older than wind, and the air smelled of pine and damp earth. The path was forgotten, overgrown, but not empty. They followed it slowly, hand in hand, until they came to a clearing where an old bench sat beneath a crooked tree. On the bench was a small wooden box, carved with waves and stars, weathered by time, but untouched by moss or rot. Inside was a folded piece of paper and a tiny brass key. The note was written in the same careful handwriting as the page they'd found in the boat. "There is more to this place than you know," it said. "The lighthouse is a door, but not all doors are made of wood and hinges. Some are made of memory." Eli looked at Mira, who clutched the key in her small hand, her eyes wide with wonder. "Do you think this belongs to the lighthouse?" she asked. Eli nodded. "I think the lighthouse has secrets." And as they made their way back to the stone tower at the edge of the world, the golden light swept across them once more, steady, strong, and waiting. The sixth night at the lighthouse arrived with a hush so deep it felt as though the world had stopped to breathe. The rain had quieted to a fine mist, and the sea below looked like rippled glass, silver in the moonlight. Eli and Mira sat curled beneath a thick woolen blanket near the fireplace on the main floor, the warm glow flickering across their sleepy faces. Between them lay the tiny brass key they had found in the forest clearing, and the note that spoke of memories and doors that didn't swing on hinges. All day they had searched the lighthouse for locks, a drawer, a box, a door hidden beneath the floorboards, but nothing seemed to match. The key, small and delicate, felt both ordinary and extraordinary, like something that might unlock not an object, but a moment. Mira, always quiet but full of thought, suggested they stop looking with their eyes and start listening instead. Eli didn't know what she meant at first, but later that evening, as the lantern began its slow golden spin across the sea, he understood. They climbed back to the top of the tower and sat in silence, eyes closed, breathing in the rhythm of the lighthouse. And that's when they heard it. Not a sound, but a memory. It came to them like a dream drifting in on the mist, a whisper of laughter, a song hummed under someone's breath, a soft thud of footsteps long gone. The lighthouse, it seemed, had been listening for years, holding on to every voice, every echo, every story. "Maybe the key isn't for something outside," Mira whispered. "Maybe it's for what's inside us." That thought stayed with them as they settled down for sleep, wrapped in warmth and wonder. Later, sometime deep in the night, Eli awoke and found Mira standing near the lantern, her red coat glowing softly in the light. She was holding the key up to the glass, as if testing it against the stars. When she saw him watching, she smiled and said only, "I remembered something." But she didn't say what. She tucked the key back into its little pouch and climbed into bed. The wind returned slowly, brushing the tower with gentle hands, and the lighthouse beam swept out again, not just through fog, but through time itself. That night, the dreams that came to Eli were vivid and full of light, of the lighthouse glowing brighter than ever, of voices calling across the sea, and of doors gently creaking open one by one to rooms filled with memory. The seventh night arrived with a kind of softness that wrapped around the lighthouse like a woolen scarf. Thick clouds hovered low over the sea, and a breeze brushed gently through the tall grass, carrying the scent of salt and pine. Inside, everything felt slower, quieter, and deeply peaceful, as if the entire world had been tucked into bed early. Mira had spent most of the day humming, a tune neither of them knew, but both of them recognized in their bones, like it had been sung to them in some other lifetime. She moved through the lighthouse like someone searching for something invisible, her fingertips trailing along the walls, pausing now and then as if listening for something behind the stone. Eli watched her with a quiet curiosity. He had begun to understand that the lighthouse didn't just call lost travelers, it awakened things inside those who stayed. After a warm supper of soup and toast, they lit a single lantern and took the little brass key down to the cellar, a place neither of them had explored much before. The stairs creaked with age, and the air grew cooler the deeper they went. The cellar was mostly empty. Stone walls, old shelves, a few crates covered in dust. But in one corner, half hidden by an old fishing net, stood a tall cabinet made of dark wood. Eli's heart skipped. It had no handle, no keyhole, no hinges visible at all. But Mira stepped forward as if she'd seen it before in her dreams. She pressed the brass key against the smooth surface, and nothing happened. But then she whispered, not to Eli, but to the cabinet itself, a line from the old note. Some doors are made of memory. And with that, the cabinet gave a soft groan and opened just an inch. Inside was not what either of them expected. There were no treasures, no maps, no tools, only an old oilcloth bundle tied with twine. Mira lifted it carefully and unwrapped it on the stone floor. Inside were drawings, dozens of hand-drawn sketches on yellowed paper, the lighthouse from 100 angles, waves curling like sleeping cats, stars swirling over the sea, a little boy and girl standing at the edge of the cliffs. But the strangest drawing was of two children, one in a red coat, the other with wind-blown hair, standing at the foot of the lighthouse, holding hands. Behind them, drawn in shimmering ink that seemed to shift in the light, was a door floating in the sky. Mira touched the image gently. "That's us," she said softly, her voice filled with awe. Eli nodded, the hair on his arms rising. The drawing had been made long before they'd ever met, before they'd ever seen the lighthouse. But somehow it had been waiting for them all this time, waiting for them to remember, to listen, to open something that had never been locked by hands. That night, neither of them spoke much. They simply lay in their little beds beneath the lantern room, the soft hum of the sea rising to meet them, the drawings tucked safely between them like ancient lullabies. As they drifted off to sleep, they knew, without words, that the lighthouse had always known they were coming. The eighth night came with a hush that settled over the lighthouse like a comforting sigh. The rain was light but steady, like fingertips brushing the window panes, and the waves rolled in soft and slow, as though even the ocean was tired and ready for rest. Inside the tower, everything glowed with a golden warmth. The fire flickered low, the lantern turned gently above, and the pages of the old sketches from the cabinet lay spread across the table like puzzle pieces from a forgotten past. Eli and Mira sat close together, their eyes wide with wonder, studying each detail in silence. The drawings seemed to change when the lantern's light passed over them. One moment, the children in the sketches stood still. The next, their outlines shimmered as if caught in a breeze no one could feel. One drawing in particular held their attention tonight, an image of the sea, drawn with ink so fluid it seemed alive, and at its center, a dark shape like a whale or an island or perhaps something older, something dreaming. At the bottom of the page, written in delicate script, were the words, "Beneath the waves, memory sleeps." Mira traced those words with her fingertip, her voice just a whisper. "Do you think it's still there, waiting for us?" Eli nodded slowly. "I think it's been waiting for a long time." They decided to go outside, even in the rain. The wind was gentle, and the lighthouse's beam cast a path through the mist. They walked the familiar cliff path, each step soft in the damp grass, until they reached the overlook where sea met sky. Mira closed her eyes and held the brass key to her chest. "I can feel it," she said. "Something down there remembers us." Eli said nothing, but the tug in his chest agreed. They climbed down the rocks slowly, careful of the slippery stone, until they reached the cove where the little boat had once rested. Tonight, the tide had pulled back farther than usual, revealing a line of stones leading out into the water like a half-drowned staircase. At the end of that path stood a rock shaped like a bell, tall, round, and oddly smooth. As they approached, the air shifted. The sea grew quiet, the wind paused, and even the rain felt still. Mira placed the key on the stone bell, and suddenly the rock hummed. It was a deep, soft sound, like the low notes of a cello played underwater. The stone glowed faintly, and a crack opened along its side, not a sharp break, but a gentle parting, as though the rock had simply remembered how to open. Inside was a spiral staircase, leading not down but inward to something ancient and impossible. Eli and Mira looked at each other. No words were needed. They stepped forward together into the memory hidden beneath the sea, and as the stone bell closed behind them, the lighthouse light swept out once more, its beam now tinged with something deeper than gold, something live. The ninth night carried a stillness that felt sacred, as if time itself had paused to listen. The rain was soft and steady above ground, but beneath the surface, where Eli and Mira now walked, the world was different. The spiral staircase had led them deep into the earth, yet the air was warm and dry, and the walls glowed faintly with a bluish light that pulsed like a heartbeat. It didn't feel like stone. It felt like memory turned solid, every inch humming with stories too old to be told aloud. They descended in silence, hand in hand, until the staircase opened into a vast chamber so large they couldn't see its edges. Above them stretched a dome of glimmering silver, like the inside of a seashell lit from within, and the floor beneath their feet was smooth as glass, but it echoed with every step as if it remembered every visitor it had ever known. In the center of the chamber stood a pool, calm, round, and perfectly still, reflecting the silvery dome above. Mira approached it first, kneeling beside it and dipping her fingertips into the water. It didn't ripple. Instead, it brightened, and images began to swirl within it, slow at first, like clouds shifting in the sky. Eli joined her, and together they watched the pool reveal scenes neither had ever seen. Yet somehow both knew. Children playing on the cliffs above the lighthouse in clothes from another time, a storm that had once nearly swallowed the tower, an old man riding by candlelight in a room that looked so familiar it made Eli's breath catch. "That's this place," he whispered. "Before us." Mira nodded. "It's showing us what the lighthouse remembers." More images flickered to life. A pair of twins building a raft from driftwood, a woman in a red shawl singing to the sea, the brass key being handed from one child to another over and over through generations. The key wasn't just a tool, it was a promise, a way back, a way forward, and then, suddenly, the pool changed. It showed Eli and Mira right there in that chamber, watching the water. But behind them, in the vision, a shadow moved, a tall, quiet shape made of light and mist, watching with eyes like lanterns. Neither child turned in the image, yet both of them reached out at the same moment, as if they could feel it. They stood up slowly, hearts beating fast, and turned. The chamber was still, but it was no longer empty. From the edges, shapes were appearing, not threatening, not strange, but gentle, familiar. Figures made of memory, wrapped in old coats and sailor scarves. People who had once stood in the same lighthouse and touched the same walls. They didn't speak, but they didn't need to. One by one, they nodded to Eli and Mira and stepped back into the dome's edge, vanishing like mist in the morning. The chamber glowed a little brighter now, the key in Mira's hand growing warm. "It's almost time," she said. "To go back?" Eli asked. She shook her head slowly. "To remember everything." And just like that, the staircase began to hum again, inviting them to rise. The pool stilled, the light shifted, and the chamber of memory waited, not to be sealed again, but to stay open for those who were ready to see. The 10th night wrapped itself around the lighthouse like a warm blanket pulled up to the chin of the world. Outside, the rain had softened to a whisper, and the wind no longer howled, but murmured lullabies through the cracks in the old stone walls. Eli and Mira had returned from the chamber beneath the sea, their boots damp, their hands still clutching the warm brass key, and their minds filled with the luminous visions they had witnessed. The lighthouse, sensing their return, seemed somehow more alive, its lantern pulsing with a deeper, steadier glow, as though the tower itself was breathing alongside them. They didn't speak much that evening. Instead, they moved through the familiar rooms, slowly, reverently, touching the walls, the worn banisters, the faded maps pinned near the desk, now seeing each object not as simple furniture or forgotten relics, but as fragments of a living story, a story that had been unfolding long before their arrival and would continue long after they were gone. In the lantern room, they found something new. A small wooden box had appeared on the table, one they both knew hadn't been there before. It was carved with wave patterns and moon phases, and when Mira opened it, inside was a folded piece of parchment and a smooth stone, cool to the touch and engraved with the symbol of a door. The note read simply, "The lighthouse remembers who listens." Eli turned the stone over in his hand and looked out through the glass to see beyond. It all made sense now. The dreams, the echoes in the walls, the feeling that this place had always been waiting for them. Mira, in her quiet way, reached up and placed the brass key into a small indentation in the base of the lantern's mechanism. An opening they'd never noticed before. It fit perfectly. The light above them shifted, changed. No longer just gold, it shimmered with soft blues and silvers, casting gentle arcs of light far across the water and into the sky. The lighthouse had unlocked something far greater than either of them imagined, not just in its foundation, but in the hearts of those who listened to it. That night, as they lay beneath wool blankets in the loft, the sound of rain above like soft tapping fingers, Mira whispered, "It's like we've woken up a part of the world that was sleeping." Eli nodded, eyes already drifting closed. Or maybe it woke us up. Outside, the lighthouse beam turned steadily, no longer just a guide through fog, but a thread of memory weaving through time, calling out not only to lost ships, but to all dreamers, all seekers, all children who had ever stood by the sea and felt something stir in their hearts. And so, in the quiet warmth of the tower, with dreams wrapped around them like the softest of blankets, Eli and Mira slept, not as guests in a strange place, but as keepers of something old, something sacred, and something just beginning to open. Sleep well now, little one. Grandpa will be waiting with another tale when the stars rise again.